Ravi and I were holistically discussing at present point in time what opportunities we are seeing, and I mean how we are placing ourselves with cash or finding value in this market. So one sector Ravi also pointed out, and you also cover very well, is shrimp sector. So starting with Vineet, so Vineet would love to have your views like from now, why we would be looking at this sector and what made you make some investments. Obviously, talking specific names is not required, but again, as a sector, we can holistically discuss and then we take further points from Ravi.
Sure, no, happy to speak about the shrimp sector and other things as well. So look, we all like to find these sectors that hated by the market for a long time, and value is suppressed, and the companies have been struggling because of multiple factors, right? Now the shrimp sector has been one which was in massive fancy uh, 7 8 years back, when we had these huge bull runs and names like Avanti Feeds, etc. They became multi-baggers in really short amounts of time, extremely loved companies. And then a whole host of factors over the last few years have hit the industry. Some structural, some were temporary, they kept moving in and out. But the biggest structural factor that hit the Indian shrimp industry was the emergence of Ecuador as the the primary competition for us in a sense. And that market, the location of Ecuador as well, the fact that it's significantly closer to the United States, which is one of the largest markets for Indian shrimp companies as well, started then having significant pressure on Indian shrimp players. And the reason Ecuador did well, obviously, was there were multiple reasons, but one of the primary reasons was that they had tremendous support from their government. Uh, there were huge subsidies, diesel subsidies that were given to the industry. So their cost structures were significantly reduced. And they were then able to push their products out into the markets like the US at lower rates. And then that put a downward price pressure on Indian shrimp players as well. And that made us slightly less competitive as compared to what we were when we were in the massive bull phase 6 or 7 years back in the shrimp sector. Uh, so because of these reasons, this sector has been, battered and bruised for a very long time, and so the prices are low. Some companies trading almost at levels which are, lower than the total asset block on their balance sheet. So almost, at bankruptcy levels, and the market had assumed that this is a sector that is doomed to remain under pressure, and some companies and smaller companies doomed to fail. And in these kind of scenarios, when there is then some fundamental change or fundamental trigger that comes in, uh, I've personally find those opportunities quite exciting. The fundamental change in this case was Ecuador has now, in the last few months, started to struggle a little bit on two counts. One, there is massive political unrest in that country. I'm not sure if many of you have seen some of those videos where certain jails, the prisoners have taken the guards captive, and there is this massive movement around the country. There's been a lot of political violence, and there is significant chance, a serious chance of there being significant civil unrest in the country. This is happening on the back of the fact that the economy of Ecuador has been struggling for some time. Inflation is very high. And 2 months back, the government pulled, in a step to reduce their fiscal spending, they pulled out the diesel subsidy that they were giving to the shrimp sector. And this diesel subsidy, the energy cost, is a significant portion of the cost of production of shrimp and the overall cost structure of these companies. This is factor number one. Factor number two, the fact that Ecuador had been exporting shrimps at significantly lower prices into the US is, you know, is pretty evident to the lawmakers in the US as well. And the US, by the way, themselves also have a small shrimp industry, and because those people they manufacture in the US where the cost base is anyway very high, so they were actually hit a lot more than the Indian shrimp players were because of this dumping of shrimp by Ecuador. And those players then filed a petition with the Department of Commerce in the United States, asking for an evaluation of an anti-dumping duty. So that evaluation is going on at the moment, and there are two types of requests. There's a countervailing duty, and there is an anti-dumping duty. The countervailing duty, in all likelihood, will get approved and will happen not just to Ecuador but also to India. Actually. So Indian shrimp also will face a countervailing duty that will be about 3 to 4%, somewhere in that range of the cost of sale. But the anti-dumping duty is specifically for Ecuador. It's not for India, and that judgment is expected sometime in the month of March or April. Now, there's no way of knowing with certainty whether the duty will be imposed, but if you just look at the numbers and the kind of bleeding that the American shrimp producers have seen in the recent past, it seems like the odds of the anti-dumping duty coming through may not be very low. And again, I'm not making a prediction. I'm just looking at it as a possible event which comes on the backdrop of an already struggling shrimp industry in Ecuador, which the numbers are not yet reflecting. These are factors that have only started to change recently. The numbers are still pretty good, and that's why, uh, by causation, the numbers of the Indian shrimp industry have not yet improved. But this is just multiple factors where things seem to be going right at the same time for the Indian shrimp industry and wrong for the Ecuador shrimp industry. And so I started looking at this sector about a month and a half or 2 months back when some of these changes started happening, and I saw value in a few players, and that's when I decided to take a position purely because I felt it was uh, good risk reward, where the odds of some of these events that are lined up happening seemed fairly high. And when you compare that to the valuations at which some of these players were available, I saw there was significant margin of safety and not much money to be lost. And so I started out with a couple of positions. They're not very large positions, of course, because these depend on many of these things that I've spoken out actually playing out. But if they do play out, I think the upside is fairly large, and that's the thesis part.
Great, Vineet. And Ravi, we have been talking since long and discussing about this sector in particular. So, anything different or different view you have, or like you have been, I mean, you had been invested and following this closely quite a while. So, what was your thesis when you invested first, and how you see it going forward from here also?
So, Vineet Bhai very aptly has, pointed out what all is what all is happening in the sector. My initial thesis was to look out for companies because yes, this particular sector has been in the doldrums for quite some time, and it's a sector which is largely export oriented. And as I said some time back that for any country's growth, exports are a key factor. So from that perspective, I started exploring this particular sector. And I would like to add some aspects to what Vineet Bhai said just now. So one of the key aspects with respect to Indian shrimp industry is that our players are now graduating more into the value added segment of the shrimp sector rather than simply exporting processed shrimp. So quite a few players have now started going into their own brands, then venturing into ready to eat domain, because originally they were largely restricted to ready to cook only. Then furthermore, they have started exploring new markets, because earlier if you see majority of the exports were largely restricted to the Western Hemisphere, but now some companies have started exploring markets in the Eastern Hemisphere as well. And this change uh, provides a unique opportunity for the overall sector also, because the requirement, the taste, what uh, taste preference in the Western and the Eastern Hemisphere is quite different, and this allows the shrimp players to utilize or monetize their production, to the maximum extent possible. So, this is what I wanted to add further.